This is Chapter 3 of The Fragile Tower, The Midwinter Fair. Grace had forgotten all about the phone by the time she stepped out of the lobby and into a cold, dark blue night. She was too tired after the training session and was looking forward to getting home into the warm, curling up in bed with a book and hot chocolate. She found Dad, Benjamin and Maggie all throwing snowballs at each other outside the elementary gym, and she followed them out onto the road. Benjamin gave up on the snowballs and started doing impressions of their Aunt Frances. His and Maggie's aunt, really, but Grace had always been made to feel part of Dad's family. It was a classic routine of Benjamin's, but made funnier tonight by the cold. When he put his fingers to his lips and puffed, it looked like he was actually smoking one of the foul little cigarettes that Aunt Frances constantly dragged on. The twins were goofing around so much that other school kids ended up overtaking them. Ma would have hurried them, but Dad was enjoying the spectacle as much as anyone else. Grace kept moving on at her own pace, gradually moving ahead of the other three, as she thought about the readings she would do tonight with her tarot cards. She was the first one to see the fair, glimmering away in the darkness on the open grass of St. Matthew's Park. She caught sight of it through the iron railings and faltered, her feet choosing to stop before her head had made a decision. The lights strung between the stalls and tents were yellow-orange, with reds and greens and whites scattered amongst them, warm and gorgeous against the ice blue and black of the snow. When she took a breath in, it was a breath made up of caramel and cinnamon and wood smoke. She took 2 crunching steps and pressed her face against the railings, her eyes full of jugglers, coconut shies, carousels and waffle stalls. It's here, right in High Peaks, she thought. The bar started to make thin, icy imprints down her cheeks, but she still stood there, breathing in flavours and watching the groups and couples who made their laughing way between the stalls. It might have been designed just for her, that fair, the perfect place for Grace the dreamer, the one who loved to watch a spectacle without having to join in, and who was always looking for strangeness in ordinary things. It held her, caught against the park railings, unable to look away while her cheeks grew numb and painful. Maggie's shrieking laughter from back down the street made her look around in the end, and a little of her skin stuck to the metal and pulled sharply as she tugged her head away. Dad was chatting to another parent she saw, one of the elementary school mums, who was laughing at his jokes, like they all did. Grace looked back at the fair, her hands reaching for the railings again. It was everything her mother hated most, right there. A snowy night, an exotic and unknown fair, full of strangers and probably swindlers, and a full moon shining brilliantly down out of the clear sky overhead. But Ma wasn't here, and none of her fears seemed reasonable this evening. It was just a fair, a prettier than usual, warm and fun and living fair. And if she didn't ask to go... She slid a sidelong glance at Benjamin, who was nearly past the end of the old Dawson Bank building and in sight of the park. Benjamin would want to go, and Maggie would want to do whatever her twin brother was doing. The little trio cleared the building, and it was actually Maggie who saw the fair first, gasping for breath between shrieks. Grace watched her face change straight from hysterical amusement into longing in the instantaneous way that Maggie seemed to have, and she flew across in front of Benjamin to clutch at the railings, already saying, "Please, oh please, Daddy," as she went. An expanding circle of lights and some jaunty piped music announced that a small Ferris wheel had begun working. Benjamin was next to his sister in a moment. "We've got to go, Dad. They've got rides and everything." "Well, I'm not sure." Dad made a small effort at resistance, which melted immediately under one of Maggie's wide-eyed gazes. "Just a short trip, then. It's a school night." Her father strolled contentedly into the park behind his squealing younger children, and then turned to look at Grace. They're the most easily excited children in the state. "You don't mind, do you?" Grace smiled at him. "Not if I can have my fortune told." She held out her hand, and he sighed as he took off his gloves and worked his wallet out of his pocket. $10 do it? "Sure." Grace was quickly lost amongst the stalls, but it didn't bother her. She could hear Maggie somewhere off ahead, in a different row, and also Dad's slightly too loud recitations of "Now you calm down, Missy," and "One thing at a time, Mags," which were really for everyone else's benefit. Grace knew she'd be able to find them without much trouble, and ignored a little flicker of guilt when she thought about Ma. It's Dad's job to look after them, she muttered to herself, and wandered in search of a fortune-teller's tent. She knew that Dad would want them home before Ma got back, so her time was limited. But she still found herself lingering amongst the many tents and stalls and displays. A fire breather was shooting flames from his mouth, which changed from yellow to red to purple to green in the air. His bare chest and face and hairless head were painted gold to match and reflect the colours in the fire. Behind him, an old woman sold toffee apples from a stall, which looked to be made all of red velvet, and beyond it a tiny carousel spun beautifully painted unicorns and dragons and lions, with 3 little children clutching tightly on. Moving towards the edge of the fair, where there were fewer people, Grace found a tent selling scarves and cloths of every imaginable colour. She paused to look into a gazebo under which a huge wheel was spinning, made up of tiny purple and black segments. A gold ball bounced on it, eventually coming to rest, either winning the gambler's money or losing it for them. After that, she moved on past a tent full of mirrors, and a gold-painted lady juggler, with hair almost as red as Maggie's, who was spinning glittering beanbags into the air and catching them in her mouth, her hands, with her feet. Grace stopped after a little while to buy a cup of hot chocolate, which was breathtakingly expensive, but also, when it came, the most delicious thing she could remember drinking. She stood sipping it, and then smiled at a mime dressed in silver, who was pretending to be crushed slowly downwards by something huge. She passed between a sweet stall and an old-fashioned shooting gallery where elaborate black and silver rifles were being fired enthusiastically at a mechanical flock of wheeling birds, but hardly making a sound. This wasn't the dirty, dishonest place Ma had led her to believe a fair would be. It was exotic, and it was clean. But more than that, it was beautiful, with its lights and its fabric, and each stall seemed to match the next one. There were no thick cables visible, no mud where trailers had driven over the snow, and in fact, no trailers visible at all. Only the patchwork of velvet tents would have given the performers anywhere to live. She saw a water fountain a few moments later. They had set it up so that multicoloured lights shone over the sprays of water. In the cold night air, the cylinders which supported each layer were covered in runs and drips of ice, which reflected the lights back again and again into her eyes. It was hypnotic, and she found it difficult to look away. It was only when she realised that there were people streaming past her purposefully that she shook her head. There was music playing loudly towards the centre of the fair, and the crowds were surging towards it. Their single-mindedness made Grace feel uneasy. They were all talking and laughing as if they knew exactly what was going on, and yet there were no signs or announcements to tell them what was happening. Her curiosity overtook her, and she drained the hot chocolate and followed them. Chapter 4 will be uploaded tomorrow, and I hope you're enjoying the story so far.